Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. Today's news are we would be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu. In page 1, there is a news about patent law. Previously, when the pandemic started, countries like India, South Africa, and some other countries in the EU, they wanted the patents on the COVID vaccines to be waived off. And from almost 2 years, the case was going on in the World Trade Organization. And now, even the European countries have proposed to relax the patents on the COVID vaccines for up to 5 years. But they are not ready to give up the patents on the COVID drugs, but it is only on the vaccines. Now here we need to understand a concept which is known as compulsory licensing. Under the Indian patent law, there is a provision wherein the government can allow the manufacturers of pharma to produce a medicine in terms of need. Say for example, there is a public emergency, or when the price of a particular vaccine is not very reasonable and it is too high for the consumers at that particular point of time, the government can allow the generic manufacturers to manufacture this particular vaccine and sell it and export it. This licensing without the permission of the patent holder is known as compulsory licensing. In the editorial page, there is a wonderful article related to circular economy. In yesterday's news, we were discussing about how by 2030 India is going to produce huge solar waste because of the PV cells that we are using and the increasing adaptation of solar, and India going towards solar means we are going to produce more and more waste in the future. How we could reduce and reuse that waste, and we could go for sustainable development by going for the concept of circular economy. Before we go into the article, let's understand the difference between linear economy and circular economy. What is linear economy? In linear economy, we manufacture a product, we use it, and when we think the life cycle of the product is over, we dispose it, and it goes into waste and dumping. And if it's an electronic item, it goes into dismantling, and if we have any valuable items in that would be dismantled and used again, and the remaining part is majorly burned or it will be sent to the landfills. But what happens in circular economy? Once we manufacture the product and we use it, say here we manufacture the product, we design it in that such a way that it is environmentally sustainable and least polluting. Then we use the product. Then we, instead of directly throwing and disposing it, whereas in the linear economy, here we try to reuse it. For example, if you have say a mobile phone, a small component in the mobile phone is gone. So instead of throwing the entire mobile phone in the dustbin, we would repair and replace just that component, and we would try to refurbish it and reuse it. And it is again put to the use. And again, if you can see after some usage, if there is wear and tear in the product, can it be serviced again? Can it be put to use? Can it be changed? Any other component can be upgraded so that it can be used again. And again, there would be repair and maintenance, and the product would be again put to use. And finally, when we think that okay, this product is no longer going to help us, then finally we would send it for recycling instead of directly disposing it. And in recycling, after recycling, we would take out all the good components of it and recover and dispose the remaining waste product. So this is how circular economy works. So if you have observed, this is the most Indian way of thinking, using a product as much as possible before finally throwing it away. This is both economically viable and environmentally also it is good, because instead of generating waste directly, we are trying to use the product as much as possible. Now go through the details of the article. The article says that we are going to produce huge solar energy and waste. The International Renewable Energy Agency says that by 2030, India would produce almost as high as 325 kilotons of solar waste from all the solar capacity, PV cells, solar panels, and other components. And having a circular economy in the country would help us in reducing the waste and would also help us brace the supply chain impacts. Because currently, if we can observe, because of the Russia Ukraine conflict, certain raw material components and because of COVID lockdown during China's pandemic, certain products couldn't be got into India and the manufacturing stopped. Take the example of the chip shortage. Because of chip shortage, which is a component in the automobile industry, the automobile industry got affected. The supply chain got disrupted. Now, if we have circular economy, we can recover the products, can recover the components from the earlier products so that we can reuse and instead of disposing, they can be put for proper economic use. Thus, by doing that, our dependence on the supply chain would reduce and any supply chain shock won't affect our economy that much. And also when it comes to the environmental benefit, it would save the environment because we are going for the concept of reducing and reusing, and it would also provide energy security for the country. It would create new jobs because when we are going for all this process of reducing reusing, different types of jobs would be created in the economy. The people would be employed in those particular sectors. So we have seen the benefits of the circular economy. Now, how can be circular economy nurtured in the Indian economy? How to increase the scope of circular economy in India? For that, certain steps have to be taken, and those are: first, it comes to the policy. We need to revise our rules with respect to the electronic waste management system. We have to bring in extended producer responsibility, which we already have in some rules, and we have to clearly define what are the roles of various stakeholders. Currently, the roles have not been defined. What is the responsibility of the producer? What is the responsibility of the retailer? Who has to collect the waste generated? How much percentage of the waste has to be recovered? All the clear rules have to be defined. And the producers have to be given certain annual targets for waste collection and recycling so that there would be some accountability on them. And secondly, when it comes to dumping and burning of different components, we have discussed that currently in the linear economy, most of the electronic waste is either burnt and whatever is possible it is recovered and the remaining part is sent to the landfills. And this would affect the soil and land very much because it is not environmentally safe. We know in the manufacturing of electronic items, there would be certain heavy metals like lead, cadmium, mercury, etc. And when we put that in landfill, it would lead to leaching. All the heavy metals would get dissolved in the water, go into the soil, and when it gets dissolved into the water, if we drink that, it would get affected for health. All the microplastics would go into the ocean, and it comes through the food chain in the form of the microplastics. The seafood will get consumed. When we consume the seafood, it will come into our food chain. Again, it would impact our health. So putting electronic waste in land form, on one side it would affect the soil and would lead to and water pollution. On the other side, it would directly impact the food chain, and when humans and other animals consume, it would impact our health. And if we burn the same waste, it would release various toxic gases like the sulfur dioxide and VOCs, volatile organic compound, which is again bad for the human health, and we are again adding to the pollution. What has to be done? We have to invest heavily in research and development because recycling is a multi-step process. We have seen here in this process that once we will reuse, then there is repair and maintenance, then there is recycling. So for all this, there has to be some efficient way of carrying on the recycling process. In order to do that, in order to know what is the efficient way, we need to invest heavily in research and development. We have to find out new ways of seeing what is the efficient and environmentally sustainable way of recovering and recycling so that we would reduce the environmental footprint on the one side, and we could also save on the economic cost on the other side. For that, we need to explore technology transfer between various developed and developing, and the recovery of metal from the waste would lead to a resilient supply of the raw materials. We discussed how having recovery from the waste materials would raise us from the supply chain impacts. Fourthly, without finance, no policy can be achieved. So for that, we need to go for innovative financing route. We need to nudge the public and private sectors to come together, and the banks have to charge the lower interest rate. Government has to come up with subsidies in order to promote all this. Government has to come up with some production incentive schemes. Government should give some tax incentives to those firms which are heavily invested in recycling and reusing of materials. And we could go for a concept like the performance based green certificate, which could be traded for money, and that way companies would be very optimum about investing into this particular technology. Fifthly, we need to improve the product design and quality, because when would a product be defective? The product design is not proper, the quality is not proper, only then before the life cycle ends the product would be defective and it will get damaged. So if the product is very efficient, if the product is very good in terms of the life cycle of the product, is the number of years the product come for use would extend. So we need to invest in design and quality also. And in producing the product, we need to find substitutes for various toxic metals. We can find some other substitute for these toxic metals, we can as well avoid using. And finally, the state governments and central government should bring up policies, and they should put some heavy standards for control system, so that the low quality products won't come into the market. And if low quality products come into the market, they'll get damaged very fast and it will lead to waste at a earlier point of time. But if high quality products come into the product, they come for a longer period of time. That way the waste generation would be reduced. The authors finally end by saying that the renewable energy recycling system is very complex, because all these aspects have to be taken care of, and it would also provide heavy employment opportunities on one side, it would reduce the economic cost, and it would save the environment on the other side. Because of all these benefits, we have to invest heavily in the circular economy. And currently majority of the workers who are engaged in the recycling and dismantling are the informal workers who are working in unsafe conditions. And if government comes up with a proper policy, even the informal workers get the formal benefits, and it would impact everyone and lead to the economy. That's about this art. Moving forward, in the text and context page, there is an article about using Yuan as the reference currency. We need to look at the backstory here. The previous news we have discussed about how Russian banks have been removed from the SWIFT payment system. So we have discussed about how the Russian importers and exporters are struggling to make payments and receive payments, how the Indian importers and exporters are struggling to make payments to Russian importers and exporters. And USA also has put a ban on the import of Russian oil. So Russia is allowing discounted oil at discounted prices to India. So if we are going to purchase, how do we make payment to Russia? That is the main problem. Currently, US dollar acts as the link currency. Say we say, for example, 1 US dollar equals to 70 Indian rupees, and we say 1 US dollar is equals to say 20 Russian rubles. Now, because the US dollar is a link currency, 1 US dollar is equal to so much rupees, 1 US dollar equals to so many Russian rubles, we can equate these two. Now that USA has banned the use of US dollar, and it has banned all the transactions with it comes to the exchange rate, what is the link currency? So we are trying to explore that. Now people are finding it viable to use the Chinese yuan as the link currency. Now instead of the US dollar, we would probably using Chinese dollar as the yuan, Chinese yuan as the link currency, to see the conversion rate, to see how many rupees equals to how many Russian rubles. Now let's look into the details of the article. Now because Russia has been banned out of the SWIFT payment system, and because Russia is not able to make payments, they are looking for Chinese yuan as the reference currency. And why will the Russians use Chinese yuan instead of the US dollar? Currently, the US dollar is major accepted currency because everybody accepts US currency, because of which the strength of the US currency in the global market is high. Not many countries accept the Indian rupee as a global currency, but because of the increasing strength and clout of China, because of its increasing trade power, more and more countries are ready to accept Chinese yuan. Now, even the oil traders and traders, they are looking at alternatives to US dollar because of major trade that happens to you. The US government has the power to freeze the assets of the other governments. Currently, the US government has freezed the assets of the Russian government. All the foreign assets of the Russian government have been freezed. Whichever assets are there in the banks of Russia, banks of USA, they have been freezed. So the Russians have not been able to use those money to make foreign exchange transactions. So people are looking at the impact that the US dollar is having, and now they want to look for alternatives. Currently, almost 90% of the global trade happens in terms of US dollars. Only 3% of trade happens in the Chinese yuan. But still, yuan is a better alternative to US dollar. Now, what would it mean to India? It would just mean, as we have discussed, instead of US dollar being used as a link currency to see the conversion rate between rupees and Indian rupees, we would probably use the Chinese yuan. And what is the problem of using Indian rupees as the direct reference currency? We could probably pay Russians in India, Indian rupees. But why is not happening? If you look at the trade numbers, Russia's exports to India were almost $7 billion, whereas India's exports to Russia was almost $3.5 billion. So Russia has a trade surplus of almost 3 billion in its favor. So if you pay through Indian rupees, if you settle the transactions through Indian rupees, Russia would almost have $3 billion worth of rupees in its account. But what would it do with the account with that rupees? Because nobody accepts Indian rupees that much as compared to US dollar, and Chinese yuan is accepted more as compared to Indian rupees. Right? Both Russia and India now are planning to use yuan as the reference currency for the conversion of rate. And this also gives a message to the other global economies that heavy dependence on any one country would give the strategic power to that particular country. Now we can see how USA is trying to cripple the economy of Russia by freezing all the foreign exchange assets of Russia in its country. So it is a message clearly for other countries not depend wholly on any one country. So now Chinese yuan is rising as an alternative. That's about this article. The business page today, all of the news are related to individual corporate companies. Nothing important from the basic point of view. So you can skip all this. These are the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.